Day 575 Sunday, January 19th. 2 Kings 23:26-37, 2 Chronicles 35:20-23, 2 Chronicles 36:1-5, and Jeremiah 22:1-23. 2 Kings 23:26-37 NKJV. Nevertheless the Lord did not turn from with which his anger was aroused against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will also remove Judah from my sight, as I have removed Israel, and will cast off this city Jerusalem which I have chosen, and the house of which I said, My name shall be there. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? In his days Pharaoh Necho king of Egypt went to the aid of the king of Assyria, to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went against him. And Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo when he confronted him. Then his servants moved his body in a chariot from Megiddo, brought him to Jerusalem, and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz the son of Josiah, anointed him, and made him king in his father's place. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Now Pharaoh Necho put him in prison at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Then Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim the son of Josiah king in place of his father Josiah, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And Pharaoh took Jehoahaz and went to Egypt, and he died there. So Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land, from every one according to his assessment, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebudah the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. 2 Chronicles 35:20-23 NKJV. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho king of Egypt came up to fight against Carchemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. But he sent messengers to him, saying, What have I to do with you, king of Judah? I have not come against you this day, but against the house with which I have war, for God commanded me to make haste. Refrain from meddling with God who is with me, lest he destroy you. Nevertheless Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself so that he might fight with him, and did not heed the words of Necho from the mouth of God. So he came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And the archers shot King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, Take me away, for I am severely wounded. 2 Chronicles 36:1-5, NKJV. Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz the son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Now the king of Egypt deposed him at Jerusalem, and he imposed on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Then the king of Egypt made Jehoahaz his brother Eliakim king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. And Necho took Jehoahaz his brother and carried him off to Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Jeremiah 22:1-23 NKJV. Thus says the Lord, Go down to the house of the king of Judah, and there speak this word, and say, Hear the word of the Lord, O king of Judah. You who sit on the throne of David, you and your servants and your people who enter these gates. Thus says the Lord, Execute judgment and righteousness, and deliver the plundered out of the hand of the oppressor. Do no wrong, and do no violence to the stranger, the fatherless or the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. For if you indeed do this thing, then shall enter the gates of this house, riding on horses and in chariots, accompanied by servants and people, kings who sit on the throne of David. But if you will not hear these words, I swear by myself, says the Lord, that this house shall become a desolation. For thus says the Lord to the house of the king of Judah, You are Gilead to me, the head of Lebanon. Yet I surely will make you a wilderness, cities which are not inhabited. I will prepare destroyers against you, everyone with his weapons. They shall cut down your choice cedars and cast them into the fire. And many nations will pass by this city, and everyone will say to his neighbor, Why has the Lord done so to this great city? Then they will answer, Because they have forsaken the covenant of the Lord their God, and worshipped other gods and served them. Weep not for the dead, nor bemoan him. Weep bitterly for him who goes away, for he shall return no more, nor see his native country. For thus says the Lord concerning Shallum the son of Josiah king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, who went from this place. He shall not return here any more, but he shall die in the place where they have led him captive, and shall see this land no more. Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness, and his chambers by injustice, who uses his neighbor's service without wages and gives him nothing for his work, who says, I will build myself a wide house with spacious chambers, and cut out windows for it, paneling it with cedar and painting it with vermilion. Shall you reign because you enclose yourself in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink, and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. He judged the cause of the poor and needy, then it was well. Was not this knowing me, says the Lord? Yet your eyes and your heart are for nothing but your covetousness, for shedding innocent blood, and practicing oppression and violence. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning Jehoiakim the son of Josiah king of Judah, they shall not lament for him, saying, Alas, my brother, or alas, my sister. They shall not lament for him, saying, Alas, master, or alas, his glory. He shall be buried with the burial of a donkey, dragged and cast out beyond the gates of Jerusalem. Go up to Lebanon and cry out, and lift up your voice in Bashan, cry from Abarim, for all your lovers are destroyed. I spoke to you in your prosperity, but you said, I will not hear. This has been your manner from your youth, that you did not obey my voice. The wind shall eat up all your rulers, and your lovers shall go into captivity. Surely then you will be ashamed and humiliated for all your wickedness. O inhabitant of Lebanon, making your nest in the cedars, how gracious will you be when pangs come upon you, like the pain of a woman in labor? Daily Deep Dive, the UCG reading plan states, despite the incredible reforms under Josiah, the changes for the people were only superficial, and God knew it would not be long before they were openly rebelling against him. Again, they had shown their true colors under the wicked reigns of Manasseh and Ammon, and inside they were really no different. So God pronounces calamity on Judah, but remember that he had promised before that this calamity would not come until after Josiah's death, 2 Kings 22, 16-20. And eventually his death came, 13 years after his great Passover, and 3 years after the fall of Nineveh. Pharaoh Necho II 609-594 BC was the recently crowned king of Egypt's 26th dynasty. During the long years of Josiah's reign, 640-609 BC, Assyrian power had steadily crumbled until, as Nahum had predicted, Nineveh itself had fallen 612 BC to a coalition of Chaldeans, Medes and others. The surviving Assyrian forces had regrouped at Haran, because Egypt was a long-standing ally of Assyria, since its integration into the empire several decades earlier. Necho journeyed northward to help the beleaguered Assyrians. Nelson Study Bible, note on 2 Kings 23:29-30. The King James Version incorrectly has Necho marching against the Assyrians. Pharaoh Necho turned up in Judah at the head of a more impressive-looking Egyptian army than had been fielded in centuries. Taking advantage of Assyrian decline, Necho's father Psammetichus I, who had been appointed pharaoh by Assyrian Emperor Ashurbanipal, had greatly revived his country's clout as a superpower. Ian Wilson, The Bible is History, 1999, p. 174. Emboldened by his success, Psammetichus refused to continue payment of tribute to Assyria. Hof Egypt remained more or less an ally of Assyria until his death, and even beyond Meroe, Kingdom of Priests, p. 439. Perhaps Necho at this later time was not so much interested in restoring Assyria as he was in keeping a balance among the Mesopotamian powers. If Assyria were utterly eliminated, Babylon would fill the void as an unchecked power, creating major problems for Egypt. In any event, Necho advanced up the coastal plain through Philistine territory, but this area was now under the control of Judah's king Josiah. A Hebrew letter written in his time has been found at Mesat Hashavyahu, a fortress built on the coast between Jabneh and Ashdod. According to the letter, an Israelite governor resided at the fort, thus Josiah ruled also over this area, expanding his kingdom at the expense of the Philistine cities Yohanan Aharoni and Michael Aviona. The Macmillan Bible Atlas, 1977, p. 102. Indeed, remember that, apparently with earlier help from the Scythians, Josiah's purification of worship was carried out not only in Jerusalem and Judah, but also in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, even unto Naphtali, throughout the land of Israel. Chron. 34, 6-7. Thus we may assume that Josiah again ruled in all these areas and annexed the Assyrian provinces which had been founded in the territory of the Kingdom of Israel, Samaria, Megiddo, and possibly also Gilead. This is confirmed by the fact that he fought at Megiddo, p. 102. When Pharaoh Necho passed through Judah on his way to fight the Babylonians at Carchemish, Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. It is far from clear why he did so. Most likely is the suggestion that he wanted to assure Judah's independence among the nations. Had he permitted the Egyptians to pass through, he could have been considered to be a collaborator against Babylon. Josiah, Paul Gardner, editor, The Complete Who's Who in the Bible, 1995, p. 384. There is no doubt that Josiah would not have wanted anyone helping Assyria back into power, and it is possible that Judah still maintained a residual alliance with Babylon since the days of Hezekiah. Then again, perhaps Josiah simply did what any ruler would do when an uninvited foreign army comes marching through your land: put a stop to it to make sure your borders are respected. Necho was disturbed at Josiah's refusal to back off. He sent a message with a religious overtone. He argued that God had told him to move quickly, that Josiah's hostile acts were a threat to the accomplishment of God's will, and that God would punish him for it. p. 384. Now God, it is true, did at times speak to pagan rulers about a course of action he wanted them to take. See Genesis 26, Genesis 1:25, Daniel 2:28. Yet ancient monarchs often made such claims falsely, and Josiah really had no reason to believe God had actually spoken to the Egyptian pharaoh. He assumed it was a lie, as most of us probably would were we in his shoes. So what did Josiah do wrong? He is often accused of meddling in someone else's affairs, but it's not really someone else's affair when a foreign army is marching through your country and you're the king. Perhaps then, the only obvious thing Josiah can be faulted for is a failure to ask God what to do. It would seem that he could have asked the priest to consult the Urim and Thummim, or he could have sought out a prophet. However, it may be that this would have taken time Josiah did not think he could afford in the situation, though this would be improper reasoning since God's will is paramount. Perhaps Josiah assumed that it was always God's will for the king to defend the nation's borders. We just don't know. In any case, God had communicated a message to Necho or in some way impressed on his mind the need to act as he did. See Chronicles. And Josiah was mortally wounded. But Josiah did not die on the battlefield. He died in Jerusalem and was buried there with full honors. Perhaps this was because God had promised, "Surely, I will gather you to your fathers, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace." 2 Kings 20. And indeed, he died in peace though he had been wounded in battle. With Josiah's resistance, Pharaoh Necho was sufficiently delayed so that Haran was lost to the Assyrians. This is rather interesting to contemplate. God had directed Necho to make haste, and if he had made it to Haran in time, the Assyrians would presumably have held out against the Babylonians. Yet was this truly God's will? More poignantly, did Josiah actually cause God's will to be thwarted? Certainly not. It makes far more sense to realize that it was actually God's intent that Necho not make it on time. Why then did he tell Necho to make haste? Perhaps it was to create the very situation that brought about the death of Josiah and, consequently, placed Judah under Egyptian rule. For Necho now ruled all the territory up to the Euphrates. Consider what a righteous ruler Josiah was, and yet God allowed him to be killed at the age of 39. In Isaiah 57:1, God said, "The righteous perishes and no man takes it to heart. Merciful men are taken away, while no one considers that the righteous is taken away from evil. He shall enter into peace, they shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness." Perhaps this, more than anything, is why Josiah died when he did. It was time for Judah to be punished, and Josiah had to be taken out of the way first. Rather than our being overly critical of a final mistake on his part, especially lacking information to properly judge exactly what happened, we would do better to focus on the tremendous positive example of this great ruler, as Jeremiah did. Jeremiah 22:15-16. Indeed, Jeremiah led the nation in a lament, the words of which have not been preserved, over losing the most righteous king Judah ever had. 2 Chronicles 35:25. See 2 The wind shall eat up all your rulers. In the wake of Josiah's death, Josiah's son Jehoahaz was made king by the people of the land. 2 Chronicles 36:1. This was a technical term that referred to a body of leaders such as a council of elders, or a kind of informal parliament. See 2 Chronicles 3:25. This group acted in a time of crisis, such as the death of Josiah in battle, actually from battle. His loss was made worse by the fact that he had at least 4 sons who could succeed him. Josiah, probably not expecting to die for many years, may not have made his choice of successor clear. Nelson Study Bible. Note on 36:1. Jehoahaz, called Shallum in Jeremiah 22:11, was Josiah's third son. See 2 Kings 4:18, 1 Chronicles 3:15. The name Jehoahaz means the Lord has grasped. This is the same name as the king of Israel, the son of Jehu. 10:35. Johanan, Josiah's first son, apparently had died, and Eliakim or Jehoiakim, the second son, was bypassed. A fourth son, Mattaniah or Zedekiah, would eventually ascend to the throne and rule as Judah's last king 598 to 586 BC. Note on 2 Kings 23:31. Sadly, the reforms of Josiah's magnificent reign didn't last. Jehoahaz turned out to be evil like Josiah's predecessors, but he only reigned 3 months. Jehoahaz's reign of 3 months came to an end with the return of Pharaoh Necho from Haran. Jehoahaz was summoned to Riblah, Necho's headquarters in Syria. Then he was led away to die in Egypt. His brother Eliakim was installed on the throne with his name changed to Jehoiakim. Judah thus became no more than a vassal of Egypt. The curse for Judah's disobedience was about to fall. See Deuteronomy 28:64-68. Note on 2 Kings 23:31. Necho, it appears, did not accept Judah's appointment of its own king. He wanted it made clear that no one would now reign in Judah except by his appointment. The change of Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim also demonstrated the Pharaoh's overlordship. Regrettably, Jehoiakim, like his brother, did not follow in Josiah's ways but continued in the evil ways of most of Judah's rulers. Jeremiah addresses these events and prophesies the outcome in most of Jeremiah 22. In 2 Chronicles 5:25, the prophet leads the nation in a lament. Jewish custom, which derives from biblical times, is a week of intense grief as the first part of a month of official mourning. For close family members, a lesser form of mourning might continue for a year. Jeremiah 22:10 shows that more than 3 months have passed since Josiah's death. Jeremiah says to no longer weep for him, but to instead weep for his successor Shalom Jehoahaz, who has been taken away to Egypt, never to return. Verses 10-12. Jeremiah then launches into a scathing prophecy against Jehoiakim, addressing him first in the third person, verses 13-14, then as you, verses 15-17, and finally by name, verse 18. Jeremiah's description speaks for itself. Like so many people in power, Jehoiakim looked after his own interests at the expense of his subjects, building a great palace while extorting from his subjects to pay tribute to Egypt. This was in direct violation of God's law. Leviticus 19:13. Jeremiah uses Jehoiakim's father Josiah as an example of true godly leadership, doing what is right and just, defending the cause of the poor and needy. He explains that this is what it means to really know God. See verse 16. Indeed, Josiah did this and lived well, without having to oppress people. Verse 15. Having a huge mansion might look impressive, but it doesn't equate with godliness and true leadership. Jehoiakim suffered from a malady experienced by many people in power, covetousness. Verse 17. And, as Jethro advised Moses more than 800 years earlier, covetous people make for poor leaders. Exodus 18:21. Indeed, this led to still worse sins. The first part of Jeremiah 22 appears to also relate to the reign of Jehoiakim, as there is no break between verses 9 and 10. It further illustrates the decline in justice and righteousness that followed Josiah's reign. God says to the king, "You are Gilead to me, the head of Lebanon." Verse 6. These places were sources for timber for the royal palaces. These luxurious residences would be reduced to deserted wilderness and set ablaze if the kings disobeyed the covenant. Nelson Study Bible note on verses. And sadly, Jehoiakim and the other kings following Josiah did just that. Verses 8-9 foretell the right conclusion other nations will eventually reach about Jerusalem's destruction. Just as Moses had warned in Deuteronomy 29:24-28, Jeremiah also pronounces judgment on Jehoiakim personally. Some of this may have been added later, following Jehoiakim's attempt to destroy Jeremiah's recorded prophecies. See Jeremiah 36:27-32, especially verse 32. There will be no national lament or proper burial for Jehoiakim. Jeremiah 22:18-19. The people of Judah will instead lament their worsening circumstances. God tells them to go cry in Lebanon to the north, in Bashan to the northeast, and in Abarim in the southeast. Jeremiah 22:20, perhaps indicating the length over which Josiah had extended his rule. The nation's lovers or allies will themselves be carried away when destruction comes, and will thus provide no help. Verses 20-22, that destruction, unstated here, will come from Babylon. Babylon is mentioned in verse 25, but that part of chapter 22 is beyond our current reading, as it was evidently given later, during the reign of Jehoiakim's son Jeconiah. In verse 23, the inhabitants of Lebanon, making your nest in the cedars, apparently refers not to Lebanon of the north but, as verses 6-7 indicate, to Jerusalem. Isaiah 7:24, Jeremiah 22:23, Ezekiel 17:3-12. For Lebanon's cedars were used in building the temple and houses of Jerusalem, and its beauty made it a fit type of the metropolis. Jamieson, Fawcett and Brown's commentary note on Habakkuk 2:17. The National Armory from Solomon's time was actually called the House of the Forest of Lebanon. See 1 Kings 7:2, 1 Kings 10:16-17, Isaiah 22:8. And the wealthy of Judah built cedar mansions aloof from the common people to ensure protection. Compare Habakkuk 2:9. Yet no reliance on the temple, palace, armory, or rich neighborhoods would save the people of Judah from what was coming. The winds of adversity and invasion would eat up their rulers and bring them to shame for their wickedness. Jeremiah 22. Historian Walter Kaiser Jr. sums up this period of Judah's history. The drama of the final years of Judah and the Davidic line of kings involved the three major international powers of the day: Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. Of course, there were minor roles given to the Sumerians, the Scythians, Medes, and other people groups who longed to fill the vacuum as Assyria began to show signs of weakening. 3 of the final 4 decades of the 7th century, 640 to 609 BC, provided a glimmer of hope and the prospect of revival of a restored and even a reunited nation as a result of Josiah's reform in 621 BC. Alas, however, the maelstrom of international unrest proved too much for the last 5 Davidic kings of Judah in the last decade of the 7th century and the first decade and a half of the 6th century, 600 to 587 BC. 2 of the last 5 Davidic kings met their deaths as a direct result of involvement in these international struggles, while the other 3 died in exile. A History of Israel 1998, p. 386, and